Imagine a massive, solid block of stone that suddenly shatters into dozens of jagged, floating fragments. This is the baseline reality of ancient Indian statecraft. To understand how power actually functioned on the subcontinent, we have to examine two distinct windows of time: the Mahajanapada era, around 600 BCE, and the Post-Gupta Era, stretching from the 6th to the 9th century CE. Between these two eras, the absolute center of gravity migrated westward. It moved from Pataliputra in the eastern Gangetic Plains to Kannauj in the Doab region. Comparing these two endpoints reveals exactly how the mechanics of Indian statecraft transitioned from centralized consolidation to decentralized feudalism. The history of ancient India is rarely about a simple sequence of kings and dynasties. It is a masterclass in the structural engineering and the eventual dismantling of imperial power. Long before the rise of massive empires, populations operated as nomadic pastoral tribes, known as jana. Eventually, these tribes settled, establishing fixed territorial footholds with hard borders, a transition explicitly named Janapada, or the foothold of a people. By 600 BCE, prior to the rise of Buddhism, this settling process culminated in 16 major territorial states across the northern belt of the subcontinent, known as the Mahajanapadas. While many of these 16 states were standard monarchies ruled by a single king, several developed different methods of governance. States like Malla and the Vaji Confederacy operated as Ganasangas, or aristocratic republics. Instead of a single autocrat, they were governed by assemblies of titular heads and clan representatives making collective decisions. This pillar stands at Vaishali, the ancient capital of the Vaji state. It is a physical remnant of a functional republic operating long before the concept was formalized in the West. The Mahajanapada era operated as a constructive multipolarity. It was a highly active, experimental crucible of governance models, all competing for structural supremacy. Out of this competitive crucible, the kingdom of Magadha emerged as the dominant force, systematically annexing its rivals, including Anga, Kosala, and the Vaji Confederation. Magadha's early success relied heavily on geography. Its initial capital, Rajagriha, seen here in the ruins of modern Rajgir, was surrounded by rugged terrain, providing a highly defensible stronghold against invading armies. Pushing outward, Magadha secured control over the Ganges River and local iron ore deposits. This allowed them to monopolize riverine trade routes and equip massive infantry forces with advanced iron weaponry. We see the economic engine of their expansion in these silver punch-marked coins. By controlling hard currency, Magadha bypassed barter economies, imposing a standardized tax system to extract wealth from vast new territories and fund a permanent standing army. Through a strict monopoly on hard currency and strategic geography, Magadha successfully swallowed a multipolar landscape and forged a singular, centralized imperial hegemony. Skip forward roughly 1,000 years to the 6th century CE. The highly centralized model built by Magadha and perfected by the Gupta Empire finally collapsed, plunging the subcontinent back into a state of multipolarity. The catalyst for this fracture came from the northwest. Central Asian Huna tribes, led by commanders like Toramana and later his son Mihirakala, penetrated the Khyber Pass and dismantled the Gupta military lines. The depth of this invasion is recorded right here, on the Aran stone boar inscription. Carved onto an 11-foot avatar of Vishnu, it declares the Huna king Toramana as ruler of the earth. Finding this inscription deep in central India proves the central borders had entirely failed. The empire had been punctured all the way to its core. With the center broken, the geographic pivot shifted away from Pataliputra entirely. Power decentralized into regional strongholds, the Malkaris taking control in Kannauj, the Maitrakas in Gujarat, and the Gaudas ruling Bengal. Unlike the 16 states of 600 BCE, this new landscape was a deconstructive multipolarity. It was the terminal decay of an imperial system, rather than the birth of one. In the 7th century, a ruler named Harsha attempted to stitch northern India back together, operating from the new strategic capital of Kannauj. Harsha achieved significant military success, but his administrative blueprint was entirely different from Magadha's. His government relied on layers of outsourced hierarchy, moving from the king down to provincial heads known as Uparika Maharajas, and further down to local Ayuktakas. In a centralized system, taxes and loyalty flow straight to the top. But under Harsha, revenue and manpower often bottlenecked at these middle provincial layers. The highest military officials, the Mahajanapadas, were no longer salaried employees of a central state. They operated as autonomous feudal lords, holding their own land and maintaining distinct loyalties. The economy shifted to match. Instead of relying on vast reserves of centralized coinage, trade increasingly depended on the hundi, an early bill of exchange, while the state paid its officials entirely through land grants. This dependency on land grants tied the population to specific territories under the control of local lords, ending the era of cross-continental mobility. This physical stagnation caused the social order to fracture into thousands of rigid, hereditary subcastes, while the loss of central oversight allowed localized patriarchal customs to take hold, causing the status of women to decline. At the bottom of this steep hierarchy, the peasantry was effectively trapped, burdened by heavily localized taxation and forced labor exacted by regional landlords. Harsha's reunited empire was a fragile facade. By outsourcing its power to feudal lords, the architecture of the state guaranteed that it would violently fracture the moment he died. When Harsha died without an heir in 647 CE, that exact violent fracture occurred. The resulting power vacuum triggered what is now known as the Tripartite Struggle. Three massive military vectors converged on the center: the Palas expanding from the east, the Gurjara Pratiharas from the west, and the Rashtrakutas marching up from the south. All three empires obsessively targeted Kannauj, which stood as the absolute strategic and symbolic center of the subcontinent. This state of continuous warfare did not mean a lack of resources. The Rashtrakutas, for example, directed massive localized wealth to construct the intricate Ellora caves, carved straight into the rock. But because the administrative machinery of centralization had been replaced by localized feudal land grants, no single faction could actually consolidate its gains. None had the structural capacity to win the tripartite struggle, resulting in permanent geopolitical gridlock. Look at the two endpoints of this timeline. In 600 BCE, 16 competing states were actively inventing the tools of centralization. By the 9th century CE, three massive, exhausted empires were tearing those tools apart. Over those 1,500 years, the core of Indian political power packed up and migrated from the eastern Gangetic Plain directly into the western Doab region. The early states of the Mahajanapada era built the structural engine of the Indian Empire. The feudal states of the Post-Gupta Era dismantled it, permanently setting the stage for a deeply regionalized medieval landscape.